Hello and welcome to America First. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Ali Asghar. America First uses comedy to explore overseas solutions to the problems America's still dealing with. Because we want America to be first in everything, and not just school shootings, obesity, and the hashtag white people can't dance. Convincing strangers to watch those dance moves on TikTok, that's true white privilege. On this episode, we'll explore a work-life balance experiment in New Zealand, a country that was first discovered by Americans in 2001. To learn more about this topic, we'll be joined by businessman Andrew Barnes, who pioneered the 4-day workweek at his firm in Auckland. But first, a look at work-life balance here in America. According to the OECD, which measures economic outcomes in the world's most developed countries, the US ranks 29th out of 40 countries when it comes to work-life balance. We're behind Canada and even countries like Estonia, which many Americans haven't heard of because we haven't invaded them yet. Nope, I definitely don't miss you, George. To understand why the US fares relatively poorly on work-life balance, let's break this equation down by evaluating work and life, starting with life. Americans simply just don't get enough life in their life. The US is the only industrialized nation that doesn't guarantee paid vacation time. But you already knew this thanks to Grandpa Bernie.
And we are also going to end the absurdity of America being the only major country on earth that does not provide paid, guaranteed sick time or paid, guaranteed vacation time.
Most grouchy old men don't want you on their front yard, but Bernie doesn't want you in the office when you could be vacationing in France. Well played, Bernie. And Bernie has a point. The US is way behind the rest of the world when it comes to paid time off. Americans get 0 days off from work guaranteed, and the 10 public holidays that Americans might qualify for might not be paid time off. In contrast, people in France, Spain, and Britain all get more than 30 days off per year. And spoiler alert, those are all capitalist countries that don't implode when people take time off from work. Mind-blowing, right, Mitch? The average vacation allowance in the US is 15 days per year, which does not meet the minimum amount required by law in 19 of the world's richest countries. The US doesn't guarantee parental leave either. Meanwhile, Europeans get up to 26 weeks paid parental leave, as we covered on our episode about childcare in France. Although, in France, 26 weeks off is also known as a weekend. Now, let's move on to the work part of the work-life balance equation. In 2019, the average American worked roughly 1,800 hours per year, or as that's known in LA, a short commute. For LA residents, the best thing about working from home during a pandemic is that their commute time is down to 30 minutes, which is how long it takes for them to drive from the bedroom to their home office. Driving in their homes is probably the #1 new skill LA residents have learnt during this pandemic. And as for the rest of the country, well, everyone's too busy working. Americans work 137 more hours per year than the Japanese, 260 more hours per year than the British, and 499 more hours per year than the French. And although the average number of hours worked per year is declining in America, it's shrinking much faster everywhere else. Between 1950 and 2012, annual hours worked per employee fell 40% in Germany, but only 10% in the US. But all those hours worked are boosting the economy, right? Well, not necessarily. If we measure labor productivity as GDP per hour worked, among OECD nations, the US is one of the least productive countries in the world. We're less productive than Spain, a country where they're asleep for half the workday. Although, to be fair, some Americans are asleep half the workday too. Isn't that right, Ben? Add it all up and Americans are seriously overworked. Which brings us to New Zealand, a country with similar hours worked and productivity levels as the US. That New Zealanders are as productive as Americans is truly astounding, considering that Kiwis are required by law to spend Fridays teaching hobbits how to play rugby. It's why New Zealand has the best rugby team in the world. Hobbits become invisible by wearing the One Ring. Then they run onto the field to wreak all sorts of havoc.
Jonas Kirsten on his Super Rugby debut. Oh dear, work for that.
He's not going to want to see the replay of this, either of them for that matter.
Oh. And he hit it as well, on target. Warwick Callant. Comes anyway. Oh my Jesus, what have you done there?
He loses the ball before he reaches the try line. He's celebrating. And the world and the ball.
James O'Connor sitting in the pocket now.
And he keeps it long! Oh, there's the biggest blooper of the year so far!
Yep, all of those epic fails were caused by invisible hobbits. Good job, New Zealand. Those Fridays are very well spent. But back in the spring of 2018, Perpetual Guardian, a New Zealand estate planning firm, trialled a 4-day workweek for its 240 employees. The company's founder, Andrew Barnes, came up with the idea after reading 2 reports. The first report said that employees are productive for less than 3 hours per day. Employees spent the rest of their time eating, smoking, socializing, reading news, and in some cases, searching for new jobs. The second report, read by Barnes, argued that damage to productivity from digital distractions is akin to losing a night's sleep or smoking weed. But not everyone agrees that smoking weed harms productivity. These 2 reports informed Barnes' approach to a 4-day workweek. Rather than try to cram the standard 40 hours of work into 4 days, or have people work part-time hours for reduced pay, Barnes' staff were paid 40 hours but worked 32 hours each week, a move described by Republicans as blasphemy. As they made very clear from their comments on coronavirus relief bills, Republicans hate it when people get paid but aren't at work.
And I want to help people. I want to make sure that if you lose your job, that we cover your wages. But under this bill, you get $23.15 an hour based on a 40-hour work week not to work.
That's right. Republicans seem uncomfortable with people getting paid. But it's unfair just to call out Republicans because not paying for labor has been America's thing since before 1776. But back in New Zealand, Perpetual Guardian's 6-week trial with a 4-day workweek turned out to be an unequivocal success. Data from the trial was analysed at 2 Auckland universities by academics, who found that Perpetual Guardian's employees reported a 24% improvement in work-life balance and came back to work energized after their days off. The experiment also showed that staff enjoyed 7% less stress and 5% more life satisfaction, which is the opposite of what it feels to be alive in America in 2020. Perpetual Guardian staff were more creative, had better attendance, and didn't take long breaks, and performance didn't change with the 4-day workweek because productivity remained high. Long meetings were reduced from 2 hours to 30 minutes, and employees signaled to colleagues when they should be left alone to work. Essentially, staff figured out where they were wasting time and worked smarter, not harder, as they were paid for output, not time, which is probably Ben Carson's defense when confronted with this picture. Mothers particularly benefited, as a 4-day workweek allowed them to spend more time with family. The trial was also a win for the business, as revenues remained stable but costs fell as less electricity was used. And there are other benefits too. A 4-day workweek means a 20% reduction in demand for transport on that day off. Although, in New York, we achieved a 20% reduction in demand for transport when the MTA refused to upgrade infrastructure. Because the trial was so successful, Perpetual Guardian made the 4-day workweek permanent around October 2018. And earlier this year, New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern added her voice to the 4-day workweek.
I hear lots of people suggesting we should have a 4-day week. Ultimately, that really sits between employers and employees. But as I've said, there's lots of things we've learned about COVID and just that flexibility of people working from home, the productivity that can be driven out of that, really encourage people to think about, if they're an employer and in a position to do so, to think about whether or not that is something that would work for their workplace.
I know what you're thinking. It's hard to believe that the Prime Minister of New Zealand isn't Frodo Baggins. After all Frodo did to put New Zealand on the map. He was stabbed by a Nazgul, had his finger bitten off by Gollum, and still destroyed the ring. Surely that's worth a cabinet position at least, New Zealand. But Frodo is not Prime Minister because in countries not named the United States, women are sometimes in charge. In fact, Jacinda Ardern is New Zealand's third female leader. India, a country ranked 122nd in gender equality by the UN, elected a woman to office in 1966. And in the 54 years since then, America's biggest leap forward on this topic was Hillary, who got more votes but somehow lost the election, or as 2020 calls it, foreshadowing. But Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern knows that when you work 4 days per week, every weekend becomes a 3-day weekend. And incredibly, there's one American employee that has enjoyed 3-day weekends ever since January 2017.